it can be. And so we're going to talk about that today, about how do we mitigate that cost, but yet it's not that there's not going to be any cost. There is going to be a cost. So I just want to be upfront and very honest about that. Over the last 2 weeks, I've talked with a lot of different employers, and the last 2 weeks have been dedicated to how do we operate now in this new environment? How do we operate such that we can do what our company is supposed to do? We want to make sure that we understand that it's all well and good for us to send our employees home to work and figure out what those operations look like. However, if we don't accommodate for the safety aspect, we're going to have employees that are going to come back to work after this environment, this COVID-19 environment, and they're going to be injured. It's going to impact their ability to do their jobs. So we're going to look at specifics. We're going to look at the chair, so where people sit, how should that be set up properly, the desk, the keyboard and mouse, monitor setup, and also one of the most important things, which is stretching protocol, so that they don't actually incur injury. And lastly is to know when to ask for help. This is another common misconception, is that a lot of companies will try to handle it in-house with some basic knowledge that they find on the internet, which is fine as a starting point for general knowledge. However, every employee comes to the table with a different injury, a different background, and a different circumstance, and their profile is different. And so as a result, everyone's work environment has to be accounted for in such a way. So it's a good idea to know when it's appropriate to ask for help. Throughout everything we're going to talk today, the biggest thing to understand is that the answer is prevention. Almost without fail, ergonomics is always associated with a current injury. So in other words, an employee raises their hand and says, my back hurts, or my wrist hurts, or let's say it's a workers' compensation claim and they have to get an ergonomic assessment done. So typically that's how people look at ergonomics, as more of a reactive approach, versus in reality, every company now should be looking at this. How do we proactively help our employees avoid injuries in this new work environment? There's so many aspects of the office that we take for granted. We take for granted nice chairs. We take for granted dual monitor screens of the right size and the right distance, and proper wrist rest and mouse rest. And these are all things we take for granted. And all of a sudden now, the reality is that most people are working from the kitchen table on a laptop. And so the question is, okay, well, how long can we do this before it starts to become more of an issue when it comes to their injuries and their profiles? And here's the other thing: if we wait, so if you wait until there's a problem, the check size is going to be bigger. So right now, it's very common for us to do an assessment, let's say a virtual ergonomic assessment on an employee who already has an injury profile, and the bill can get up to $3,000, $4,000, equipment included. And that's a significant size bill for many small businesses that really, at the end of the day, should try to be avoided. That bill would not have to be as big if more accommodations were made earlier, before the injury got to, or the situation got to the point what it did. So while there probably is going to have to be an expense put towards it in the beginning, you're far better off thinking about it now and putting in an expense now early than what you are to wait until your employee actually raises their hand. Because the other thing we found out is that employees wait way too long to raise their hand. So we did an assessment on another local company, and we chatted. We had the benefit of chatting with both the employer and the employee afterwards to see how they found the experience. And we found out the employee had been dealing with that injury for the last 6 months, and they just didn't want to say anything. They didn't want to be a bother. They didn't want to be a burden on the workplace, which inherently is a good thing. It means you have a good employee, but it's actually a bad thing because they ended up having to take days and days off work because of this injury, which probably ended up actually costing the company more than if they raised their hand early and got the proper equipment or what they needed. So prevention is definitely the answer here. So you want to give guidelines and support. So we're going to talk about actually having a home office allowance for employees. I understand that most employers will kind of actually push back at that and say, wait a minute, now that's an extra expense. We're already in hard times. Does that make sense? And the answer is yes, because you're better off putting out a small amount of money now than a large amount of money later. Make sure that if you give allowance, though, make sure you give expert opinions on what they should buy. It's very possible. I've seen companies now, they're giving anywhere from $500 to $1,000 allowance for home office equipment. But people might go out and pop into, let's say, Staples or might go to IKEA and order a really nice looking chair that aesthetically is amazing, but ergonomically is horrible. So you might actually end up then spending the company's money on something that's not going to solve the problem at all. So the last thing you should do is actually leave it up to the employee to choose what they need. Someone should tell them what they need. to be able to make it for an ideal work environment. You need to encourage a culture of safety in the office. I think if you look at some different industries like oil and gas, for example, or the mining sector, health and safety is ingrained into their core, their genetic code, essentially. But we look at a lot of the office-based scenarios is not so much in many cases. So we need to be able to understand that safety needs to be implemented in the office as well as in more labor-intensive jobs. And lastly is educate your employees. So I actually have a nice takeaway piece that you can send out to your employees if you like after this. I'm not sure how we would like to circulate that, but I think the board trade should be able to circulate that after this presentation. So I'm going to just give that out that everyone can have. You can circulate that to your employees to kind of, it gives a little bit of an overview as to all the pieces that we talked about here today. So let's talk about the chair. The chair is probably one of the more important pieces to consider when you're looking at a home office. Unfortunately, a lot of times it ends up being one of the more expensive pieces as well. As I mentioned, a lot of people are probably just sitting at their kitchen table. So let's look at a few rules here. So first is the 90-90-90 rule. So 90-90-90 refers to the degree angle that your elbows, your hips, and your knees should be at. 90 degrees each way. So 9 degrees at the hips and knees means that you have your feet flat on the floor and your thighs are parallel to the floor. And then at the elbows, it means that you have proper elbow support, that you can actually be able to have it at the right height for your body type, and also the right width to be able to achieve the 90-degree angle. You need to make sure that it's a padded seat. So obviously a wood hard seat could cause lots of other difficulties, particularly around the coccyx bone, part of your pelvis if you're sitting for long periods of time. And you also need low back support. Now, ideally you would have a more ergonomic chair that has adjustable lumbar support so that you can put it there. In a lot of cases, that's not the case. So some kind of hacks that you might want to try is you can encourage employees to roll up a towel, for example, and put it behind their lower back, or maybe a pillow. A small pillow could also be used as a lumbar support. So if they have a chair but they don't have that, definitely recommend one of those two hacks to be able to actually provide enough support. Because what I've found that the back injury, both mid and lower back injuries, and fatigue is one of the first things that we see in people that work from home, because they're constantly hunched over, usually a very small screen, and as a result, it causes a lot of discomfort in those areas. So next we have the desk. So the desk doesn't have to be fancy. A lot of people think that ergonomics means you need to have one of these fancy, $2,500 sit-to-stand desk, and that's not the case. But you need to be able to make sure it's going to meet the needs for the individual, particularly when it comes to space and height. So the height of the desk should be equal height to your elbows when you're seated. So if you were to reach your hands out at a 90-degree angle, when you're seated down, you should be able to be level with the desk at that point, because if the desk is too high or if it's too low, you're going to put excessive strain on your body in that case. You need adequate space in front of the computer so that you can actually lay all your things out in front of you, so you're not twisting around back and forth constantly and having overuse injuries. So you want to have enough workspace so you can access all your materials. You want enough space underneath the desk for your legs and your feet. And the reason being is if you don't have enough, it's very possible for you to have to reach forward. If you reach forward and you're typing like this, automatically all the force and all the strain goes right to your lower back, and you will feel it within, no joke, about 10 minutes. If I asked everyone, if we're going to do a, let's say a little test, and I asked everyone to hold their hands out like this and just sit up, after about 5 minutes, you would actually start feeling fatigue in your lower back, purely just from the weight of your arms and hands being held out in front of you. So that's the reason why that support structure is put in place. You want to be close enough to your keyboards, again, going back to that 90-90-90 rule, so that your elbows can be bent at the 90-degree level. The keyboard and the mouse. So if you're using a laptop, you have to get a mouse. And I mean, this is a very cost-effective, is not expensive, but if you're constantly reaching in and trying to use the touchpad on the actual laptop, that's a really non-ergonomic positioning if you're doing that for long periods of time. So you definitely want to get a proper mouse that allows for a nice neutral position of the wrist, and then also have support for both the wrists when you're typing and also when you're using the mouse. And so what I mean by support is it means you got to keep a neutral position of your wrist. So that means this right here is a neutral position of the wrist. So this would be overextended, this would be overflexed, Or let's say if you look at the keyboard, if you have to rotate inwards or if to rotate outwards, that's not good. You want right in the middle with regard to flexibility. So you notice the example that I have up here on the screen, the keyboard is slightly angled. And if you actually were to lay your hands down your desk right now, you'd realize that the comfortable position is not actually as a typical keyboard where you see the keys are all in straight lines. That actually causes you to actually flex your hands in an outward direction in order to be in line with your keys. Ideally, there is an actual bit of an angle there that allows for that, so you don't have any excess pressure at your wrist. The keyboard should also be at a 10 to 15 degree angle. Again, that saves your wrist from having to flex inwards. You want to make sure you have soft surfaces for your wrist to lean on. Typically when working from home and also working from laptops, if you look at your laptop right now, lots of times there's edges of desks or tables or the edge of your laptop, and that's actually naturally where your wrist will land, and that's constantly putting pressure on your wrist, and that can cause various type of nerve issues and muscular issues as well. So you want to make sure you have that nice soft surface underneath your wrist, both while typing and while using your mouse. Monitors. So you need to make sure you have the right type of monitors. It's very important. I would highly recommend two different monitors. It's possible to use your laptop as that second monitor, but you're going to need to have a monitor riser to be able to have it up to the right level. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, a monitor riser, honestly, could be a stack of books, which is totally fine. Or you could buy a more expensive one. But if you have a bunch of books, you want to make sure that the screens that you're looking at are the right height. The way you know that's right height, if you look straight forward, so if your neck was supposed to be exactly neutral, right like this, so not up like this, not down like this, but right neutral, you should be able to see the top third of your screen. That should be the exact right position for you. Next, you want to make sure that's either close enough or far enough away so you're not going to damage your eyes. So a good thing to do is reach your arm out straight, and your fingertips should be touching the front part of the screen. That's how you know that the monitor is the right distance away from you. If you do use two dual monitors, you want to make sure, very similar to like in this picture, that they're both right in front and both at the same height, and so that you don't have to turn your neck excessively. I see a lot of people that make the mistake if they bring home one monitor and they attach their laptop, so they got two screens, but their laptop is very low, so they're constantly going back and forth like this, and that's not doing anybody any favors. In an ideal world, you'd have two monitors that are exactly the same size, so your eyes are not having to adjust to two different sized screens on a regular basis. If that's not possible, then again, make sure that the laptop screen is heightened so that it is at the right height in line with the monitor that you're using as well. You also want to avoid glare. So this would mean typically if there is you'll notice the window in behind me, I have the curtain pulled across. If there's glare on the screen, because you have to lean in lots of times and squint, which is bad on the neck and on the back as well. Also, if there may be a window directly behind the screen, it can cause issues as well. So you want to try, while natural light is nice, you can have it off to the side, but usually try to avoid either directly behind you or directly in front of you when it comes to glare. You want to maintain that. And lastly is the natural neck posture. This is also a massive vote against just using a laptop when you're at home, because the next time you're using a laptop, you're looking down. Okay, so you're looking down constantly. And the amount of strain that puts on people's necks, we've done assessments on some 26-year-olds that are developers that work from home, and they literally can't turn the neck this far without having various levels of discomfort and pain because they've spent so long looking down at laptops. So definitely want a proper setup when it comes to monitors. And next is regular stretching. This is probably the most important. So the reality is, the first thing we talked about, that prevention is one of the biggest things when it comes to avoiding injuries in the workplace from a home office perspective. But secondly is movement. There is no one position. Like if someone comes in and gives you the most expensive equipment possible, if you're to sit in the same position for a long extended period of time without moving, it's still not good for your body. You need to get up, you need to stand up, you need to move. So stretching is one of the best things that you can do while you're working at home. And you should be doing this every 25, 30 minutes. These stretches take maybe 3 minutes to go through. It doesn't take a long period of time. It doesn't have massive disruption in quality or continuance of work, which a lot of people sometimes are a little bit concerned about. But you should be standing up on a regular basis and stretching. So what should you stretch? Well, you want to stretch the muscles that are being shortened when you're sitting down. I will also say, if you do have a sit to stand working scenario at home, you still need to move. You still need to move. You still need to stretch. We're going to more so talk about the seated work environment today, because I think that's a little bit more common. But just to take a little kind of asterisk for the standing, if you do have a standing environment that you're working in, a lot of these principles still apply when it comes to support for your wrists and the keyboard and the mouse, in regard to the height of the desk to your elbows when you're standing and held at 90 degrees, all that. But one of the things that is new when it comes to your standing when you work is you want to make sure you don't lock your knees. A lot of people will have a lot of there's a tendency towards sticking their hip out to one side and locking one knee and relaxing the other. This can cause excessive knee problems over a long period of time. One of the best ways to avoid doing that is taking a wider stance when you're standing up. This actually encourages you to take more of a knee bent position. And I'm not telling you to take like a massive, like you're almost doing the splits or anything, but you want to be maybe just a foot width outside of shoulders width, and that'll cause you to not be as quick to lock out your knees. So just a side note, if you do have a standing working situation. But even with the standing working situation, you still need to stretch. So the muscles that are shortened when you're doing seated work, first of all, is the hamstrings. So I would imagine everyone is sitting right now as they listen to me. So just for fun, if you actually reach behind your leg, you'll feel your hamstrings. So that's the back part of your thigh, essentially. And you'll notice that it's pretty loose and is not very tight. And the reason being is because your knee is bent. As soon as your knee bends, your hamstrings shorten. So the longer that a muscle is in a shortened state, is the tighter that it gets. So it's really important that you'll notice, I have a picture here of one of the stretches. Frankly, this almost could be like another webinar in regard to stretches you can do at home. And so I'm trying to keep this as short and concise as possible to give people a bit of information. So today we're just going to look at the pictures. If you do have any more additional questions, I'll leave my email at the end and you can send me an email. We can chat about it a bit further. But you see this picture down here, a simple stretch, and you want to take about 20 seconds to hold every stretch. You can do static stretching, it's fine. And about 20 seconds per side. And if you have issues already with tight hamstrings that have led to, like myself, for example, I do have tight hamstrings, and that has led to some knee and lower back issues. I typically spend a little bit more time on my hamstrings, stretching those out. But you want to be able to take at least 20-25 seconds hold per side when you're stretching. Chest. So as you can see, as we sit down, our tendency is to roll the shoulders forward. And when we roll the shoulders forward, as we're leaning, we're typing, our chest gets very tight. It gets very tight. So we want to make sure that we open up our chest on a regular basis and stretch, very similar to this picture that I have up here in the top left-hand corner, to be able to do that once again, holding for 20 to 25 seconds. Hip flexors. So this one here, you need a little bit of space. So this picture right here, you want to make sure that you open those hip flexors, because again, you can very easily figure it out. If you dig your fingers into the crease, essentially where your thighs bend, you'll actually be able to feel it's nice and loose. If you want to feel your hip flexors turn on, just lift both your legs and march your feet, and you'll actually feel the muscle turn on there as you march both the feet off the floor. That muscle is getting tighter and tighter, and the reason why that is excessively problematic is as that gets tighter, it actually tilts your hips. That's what the muscles do, and then it causes excessive strain at the lower back. Lastly is your neck. The neck, there's actually a bunch of different neck stretches. I chose this picture because it's probably one of the more common ones. But you can go front to back, you can go side, and the good one if you do the side is hold on to something on the opposite side, like your chair, and then lean across. You can also do what's called the stargazing stretch, whereby you can rotate upwards and that'll actually stretch a different muscle group. Okay, so you can do a couple of stretches for the neck, but again, the point is to loosen those muscles instead of in a essentially almost like a frozen, shortened state. Lastly, and honestly, it's probably one of my favorites, is using a foam roller. If you don't have a foam roller, you can actually you can do a home method and use a PVC pipe, actually, which is possible to use. Like for example, for me, I have a small one that I keep at home. But this is called a T-spine mobility. So your T-spine is called your thoracic spine. So your spine, it goes from your cervical spine, which is up here around your neck, to your thoracic spine, which is pretty much from between your shoulder blades to around your middle back. And then your lumbar spine is a low part of the spine. You've probably heard people that said they had a slip disc or herniation at L4, L5 as a very common spot, because that's where most of the pressure comes from. So when you hear L, it's referring to lumbar. If you say C4 or C12 or something like that, they're referring to cervical. Or if you hear T, they're referring to thoracic. So the thoracic area is meant to be mobile, but the problem is that when we start having more and more of this kyphotic posture as we sit down, it becomes very painful and very, very uncomfortable. So spending some time to do, if you notice in the picture, his buttocks is on the ground, feet are flat, and allowing for that mobilization. So you're essentially reversing this curve forward by stretching the back backwards. Going back and forth, it actually looks like you're doing crunches, but you're not. You're just moving the spine back and forth over that area. You're causing some mobilization, and honestly, you feel like $1 million after you do it. You can buy a foam roller for like $15, so it's by far worth it to have it at home. So yeah, so some great options there to be able to, and like I said, you can run through all 5 of those very quickly within 3 to 5 minutes. It doesn't need to be a long period of time, and you get back to work. But to do that every 30 minutes or so is an amazing idea to avoiding injury that could happen. And lastly is talk to an ergonomist. So first of all, what is an ergonomist? Ergonomist can be either a kinesiologist like myself, it can be an occupational therapist, or a physiotherapist. All 3 can perform ergonomic services. The biggest thing to understand, I said this at the beginning, is that these are great general overarching themes to look at, but everybody's an individual. So if somebody had a car accident 2 years ago, another person might play recreational hockey, or another person might be overweight and they have other types of issues related to that. So there's a lot of factors that need to come to play when it comes to what is going to be the right setup for that particular individual. I've seen lots of individuals that have ergonomic assessments done. They got the expensive sit-stand desk, they got the expensive chair, and then you go and talk to them a couple months later, and they never use the sit-stand feature on the desk. They still sit down, and their chair is still not set up properly to actually fit their body and frame. And so in which case it's all useless and it's a waste of money. So definitely really important that we make sure that you get the right advice. And I will suggest, and this is a bit of a hashtag shameless plug, but you might want to consider virtual ergonomic assessments while we're dealing with COVID-19, because the idea of someone going into somebody's homes right now is probably not ideal to be able to actually have somebody give the proper assessment. And also even to be able to ship equipment directly to that person's house versus having to actually go out and go to a store and try to pick it out right now. So we want to try to limit that with social distancing. So what are the takeaway points? Number one, I think everybody should give some good consideration to a home office equipment allowance for your employees. I know it's an expense, I get it, but it's definitely worth it to preventively just put that there so that people can do that. So, but give them the allowance, but also make sure that you're giving proper guidance so that they're just not going to waste that allowance on things that are not necessary and things that are not going to help them avoid injuries. I can't tell you how much that allowance should be. I can tell you that once it gets below about $500, $300, $500, it's difficult to be able to get the right pieces and find something that's of any decent quality. But it's definitely up to the company as to how they want to spend that. It's also of note to say too that it's totally okay for you to talk with an ergonomist before they do the assessment and give them some parameters. I think this is the other big burden that sometimes comes across to employers, is they feel that if we have an ergonomic assessment done, it's just a blank check, and who knows how much the blank check is going to be, and then I feel responsible and I have to pay it. It's totally okay for you to have open dialogue with your ergonomist to say, hey, listen, we have this allowance. Can you come in and do an assessment, and please try to fit your recommendations to the best of your ability. So, like they can be honest with the employer, say, hey, listen, we recommend the following pieces. They probably need something else as well, but it's not within the budget right now. So we're going to recommend what we can to make them as safe as possible. That's totally fine. So whoever you decide to use for your ergonomic assessments, make sure you have an open dialogue with them so that you don't feel vulnerable that there's a blank check methodology. So that's the educating employees on the key pieces of equipment they should be purchasing with that allowance. Encourage micro breaks for stretching. I mean, so employees need to know that is encouraged, or debatably, I know you can't say mandatory, but sort of. So make sure to remind them. If you have a Slack channel that you use, or Microsoft Teams, or any type of collaborative type system that you're using while you're at home, send out a mass note every so often saying, hey, did everyone take time to stretch today? And remind them and encourage them that this is part of our culture now. If we're going to work from home, we need to make sure that we're being safe. And you should think about the prevention side. So don't wait until an employee raises their hand and says, I have a problem or I have an injury. Head that off. Understand, build it into your budget. Understand that we're going to have to put some money towards this. Keep in mind, not everyone will take you up on that because you can't force people to do these things, but a lot will if they know that it's encouraged. Make sure that the preventative side is being embraced versus always being reactive to people's injuries.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
On a scale from 1 to 10, how bad's my rig?
10.
We drilled to the bottom of the ocean, and we don't know what came out.
I can't believe you talked to all my people, say you gonna fight for me.
If we can look at ourselves closely, we can change this world for the better. We all need mercy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Hicks from Spirit of Newfoundland Productions. Our industry, like so many others, have been completely devastated by COVID-19, but here's what we know for sure. Science has proven that joy and happiness for human beings comes from being generous. We are hardwired for generosity. So now is more important than ever to be generous of your time, your energy, and any other resources to someone who needs it more. Stay safe from Spirit of Newfoundland Productions.
Most people living with it don't even know they have it.
I'm Alex Lifeson. My family, like many of yours, has dealt with the conditions that cause kidney disease. If you have diabetes, high blood pressure, or a family member with kidney disease, you are at risk. If you are overweight or over 50, you are at risk. And certain ethnic groups are also at higher risk. Please talk to your family doctor and have your kidney function checked regularly.